checker, and I've been with Polygraph since the beginning. Before that, I was working at the Extremism watch desk at the Voice of America. And before that, I was working in Russia before joining VOA. Actually, I was working in the North Caucasus, covering wars and things that were going on there. So I've been a journalist for a long time. That's
Yeah, I mean, you
uh,
have also been distinguished for your contributions to press freedom around the world, Fatima, and you know, your fingerprint through your work has been really bold.
Thank you so much. That's a very high praise. Yeah, thank you.
William, can we have a little bit of your self-introduction? So you...
Sure. I've been working as a journalist for over 10 years. I also started off in Russia, and one of the reasons for that was Polygraph initially focused on Russia and then kind of expanded beyond that. And so right now I specifically focus on Asia and Southeast Asia, and I've worked at different news agencies, magazines throughout Asia, and right now I'm just a reporter at Polygraph. So
great. And Nisan.
Yeah, well, I also I've been in this business for a while, and I currently, I joined Polygraph last year. Before that, I worked with Extremism Watch Desk at Voice of America for over 3 years. Before that, I worked in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, within Arabic-speaking TV stations. So all of my life, my specialty is covering Middle East, North Africa, with a focus on the Near East region, mainly Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Jordan. So you know, it's been I've been contributing to the ongoing situation in the area.
Mm-hmm. How do you want to start? Do you want to start with you, William, first, and then go to Fatima and Nisan, or?
Actually, let me introduce Polygraph a little bit.
Yeah, we would like to start with that.
Yeah, let's start with that. I'm going to share my screen first.
Yeah.
So, okay, you see my screen, right?
Yes.
So this is our website. As you see, it's kind of a lot of red. It started, Polygraph Info as a project, fact-checking project, started in the autumn of 2016. It was a joint project with Radio Free Europe. Before I begin anything, I need to have, I have to make 2 disclaimers. First, that Voice of America is an agency, news agency that is funded by the US government. However, we have an independent editorial policy since we are protected by the law from any interference from the US government, the Congress, and it's called a firewall. So VOA maintains editorial independence. Right now, we are part of the News Center, which is an English language news production and covering center at the Voice of America. Also, the second disclaimer, me and my teammates, William and Nisan, whatever we say today, we say on behalf of, our own behalf, not, doesn't reflect the views of the US government or any, it's just our personal views. So I just wanted to make sure everybody understands that before we start. So here's Polygraph Info. Our structure is pretty simple and similar to a lot of other fact checkers. We produce videos, as you see, they're situated on the top of the our website. We have sections. How are our fact checks structured? For instance, let's go to this one. So what you see here is not the date this was published, but the date the claim was made. And we have the name of the person who made the claim, what exactly that person said, and of course the source of the that claim. And then we provide a context when what was said, and then of course the verdict. The verdict is also can be seen here. We have special markings and signs to as anybody else to mark specific verdicts. We have misleading, and for misleading we have orange, an exclamation point, we have true, false, likely false, and others. So, and then we have, we go into verification. The verification part is kind of very specific because we have to provide sources of the information, and those sources must be reliable. So practically that's what we do. We identify the claim, we investigate it, research, and then we pitch it to our editor. Currently, we have a very good editor, very professional, probably one of the best at the Voice of America, Tom Detzel. And as William earlier mentioned, we started as a Russia-focused fact-checking team. We're still very small, but Tom's vision for Polygraph and I believe the VOA bosses actually share that vision is to expand Polygraph globally so we can check claims coming from all over the world. And with William covering China and Nisan, Middle East and Africa, with me covering mainly Russia, but also other places. And we have another reporter whose name we do not reveal for security concerns, who is mainly focused on Ukraine military. And this particular piece you're seeing right now is the one he wrote today. So that's Polygraph. With this, I wanna pass the microphone and the camera now to William so he can continue on, and then after he and Nisan talk about their work, we can go back and I can share some resources for verifying information, fact checking, and also the work we do on Russia and Ukraine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Fatima.
Hi, everyone. So as I had mentioned earlier, when I initially started working at Polygraph, we were only focused on Russia and neighboring countries, mostly Central Asia, Eastern Central Europe. And so I have moved over to the China desk, and I cover, well, not really the China desk. I liaison with our China desk, but I mostly cover China and East Asia and Southeast Asia. And one thing that has been of particular interest to me, because my linguistic background is in Russian. And so luckily for us, because we're a global news agency, we have desks all around the world. So for example, when I've had to verify claims, for example, if the Thai military was blocking refugees from crossing the border from Myanmar, I've luckily had the opportunity to interact with our journalists on the ground there, because we have journalists everywhere. One of the lucky things about working at Voice of America is that we even have language services, for example, in Tibetan, which wouldn't be very common in a lot of other news gathering operations, especially ones that are driven by a profit motive, because one of the benefits of being government funded in that sense is that we're able to cover language services that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do at a place like CNN, because how much money would there be in covering Tibetan issues on a daily basis, or Xinjiang, or et cetera. I think that something that's kind of interesting for me as a jumping off point would be kind of to contrast something that I've seen about Russian disinformation and what I would call China's information efforts, which includes disinformation. And I think one of the reasons why they're very different, and therefore the goals of covering their claims are different, is because they're seeking very different things in the world right now. I'm going to start off by sharing my screen and showing a picture which some of you might or might not be familiar with. So let's see. Can you all see that?
Yes.
I don't know if anyone's familiar with that image, but I think that this image very well encapsulates the way that Russian disinformation tends to work today. It's sometimes been described as a fire hose method of disinformation. And there's another, it's also been described as the 4 Ds, which is distort, dismiss, distract, dismay. And this actual picture pertains to the downing of MH17 over Eastern Ukraine on July 17, 2014. Now, what the picture is actually conveying is it's comedic, but it's a composite image of every single different conspiracy theory that has been propagated by Russian media to dismiss claims that it was in fact Russia or Russian proxies that shot down MH17. And so, for example, I think let's see the next one. I'll stop sharing for one moment. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. A slight technical.
No worries.
Yeah. Can you see my screen again? Does that come up?
Yes.
So if you look at it, once again, this came from a comedic Twitter account. And so, but if you look at what they have in the column with trolls, it was a rebel captured Buk, a Buk missile system that shot down a cargo plane. Is Ukrainian Su-25. It was actually MH370. That was, I don't know if you remember at the time, but there was a separate Malaysian airliner that had actually crashed. And that was also the subject of a lot of speculation because they never really found the wreckage. But the general point of it is that from a perspective of propaganda, and this is one of the big ways in which Russia has changed from the Soviet Union, is that they're no longer actually trying to sell an alternative vision of the world. I don't think that, apart from, maybe appealing to a few grievances within certain people in the West, there's no longer a global vision from Russia. Their disinformation is more about not actually trying to convince you of any one specific narrative. The idea is that whenever Russia has been implicated in something, the idea is to flood the zone, or to use the fire hose, to present so many different narratives on what potentially could have happened in any scenario that even if you never convince anyone of anything, there at least is the possibility that you can make them doubtful of anything else. So one thing, oops, sorry about that. Now, one area where I would say that China differs is that while China has engaged in efforts like that to some degree, China is also actually trying to sell an alternative vision of the world. And one thing about that is that it makes it a little bit kind of easier to tackle in a sense, because when you actually make a positive claim, there's something that you can actually kind of grab onto and say, is this true? Is this not true? If you could see the picture on my screen, for example, and there's a lot of reasons which I won't get into, but I find Chinese propaganda to be less sophisticated and more clunky than Russian propaganda. But if you can see my screen, this was the government of China, well, the Chinese U.S. embassy. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, just to be sure. Now, this was what you could call a pretty major gaffe, because they had tweeted out pictures, and once again, you can see trying to promote a positive image of Xinjiang, which is the province in northwestern China where people allege Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities are facing genocide, forced labor, and other allegations of rights abuses. And in trying to counter this, the US Embassy in China said that the women in Xinjiang are no longer baby-making machines. Now, you can see that that's kind of very awkward messaging, but that kind of comes part and parcel with they're trying to think of an idea of how can we not just deny a claim, but actually try to present a positive image. Because once again, China has a very specific goal. They don't just want to counter disinformation. Create disinformation. They do that. For example, they've made allegations that it was the United States who actually brought COVID-19 to China, not the other way around. But apart from that, apart from deflecting criticism that way, they have, on the other hand, they're also still trying to say to the world, we have a different model for how the world should be organized. It should be led by China, and this is why. And so I can kind of link this to an effort. Let's see. Yeah, this one. Now, I'll go to full screen. Now, one example is that because there's been a lot of criticism that China has not allowed access to Xinjiang, or that they've denied Muslims their religious rights, that because they're trying to promote a positive image, they put out positive propaganda videos showing that, in fact, the people here in Xinjiang live normal lives. They enjoy the religious freedoms. There are no concentration camps. These are actually educational camps to help people get out of poverty, etc. So they're trying to sell a positive message. This is one example during the Eid festival where the government, where for years, people in Xinjiang have said that they haven't actually been able to celebrate in a genuine way, the Eid festival. And China had put out videos of people dancing, saying, no, look, everything is great and everything is fine. So I'll just play this for a moment to kind of give an example of how we create short little videos, kind of debunking specific claims. Let's see. So, can everyone hear that?
Yeah.
At the end of the holy month of Ramadan, Chinese diplomats and journalists engaged in a concerted social media campaign, widely sharing videos that showed people dancing outside the Idgah Mosque in Xinjiang city of Kashgar. China's state-run Global Times reported that foreign diplomats from more than 15 countries gathered in Beijing to observe the live-stream festivities. This is the first time that the Xinjiang regional government held such a reception for Eid al-Fitr, showing the region's sincerity and openness amid outside slander, as Xinjiang has nothing to hide. That is misleading. The PR campaign comes as Western states petition Beijing to allow the UN unfettered access to the region to probe the plight of Uyghur and other Muslim minorities there. As for the videos, there's evidence that participation in the Eid state-sponsored festivities was at least partly coerced. Footage surfaced showing the dancers being directed on how to move, despite past celebrations being more spontaneous. One participant told a journalist he'd been ordered by his boss to attend. Others allege Uyghurs have not been allowed to pray during Eid al-Fitr for the last 6 years. Celebratory house visits and fasting for many Uyghurs were also reportedly banned. So that's just kind of one example. Honestly, we cover the entire gamut of things that can be checked, from flight verification to claims that Ukrainian government officials are engaged in organ trafficking. So it really, because there's so much to be covered and there are so many different tools that you have to cover with, our job ends up being very broad. But that's just one small little example. And from that, I'll pass it on to Nisan.
Thank you.
Thank you, William. So as I said, I cover the Middle East, North Africa, sometimes African countries. The notion of misinformation and disinformation is still evolving in the Middle East area. The way I see it, the first real use of or realization of this tool through digital media and social media started with the Arab Spring in 2010 and 2011, when 2011 and 2012, when the activists started using social media to gather and organize and spread news and report on government violations. At that time, a lot of governments in the Middle East realized that they should take control of this, of what the activists and journalists are using. So they wanted to regain their authority and spread their propaganda. And this is when we started to see pro-government electronic armies that to combat whatever narratives coming from activists and journalists, people on the ground. And this evolved from there. During the pandemic, this also, a lot of regimes or governments in the Middle East took the opportunity, if we can say so, of the pandemic and the lockdown in order to engage in website blocking and use the pandemic to activate laws criminalizing misinformation in the guise of maintaining public health and national order. So of course, it's very hard in this area to find correct information, or for many journalists, it's to find a reliable sources in the Middle East, because it's a region pretty much governed by authoritarian context. So mainly because of the turmoil also and the amount of propaganda in these countries. Another thing is, for journalists in that area, it's a risky business to fact check what a president or an official say, or a high-ranking military officer. Like for me, when I started working with Polygraph, it was something pretty much new to fact check what the president of Egypt is saying, or what the military junta in Sudan is saying. So that's, and I could do that because I work here. I work for Voice of America, but for a journalist living in that area, they can be arrested and land in prison. Of course, a lot of things, I face a lot of difficulties when I try to fact check a piece of information, when I want to use information from the ground in these countries. It's, for example, in one of the articles that I wrote recently, it was about a kidnapped boy in Syria, and his story went viral. In the beginning, I thought that, well, it went viral, I can find information easily, but it didn't. It turned exactly the opposite. Because it was viral, everyone was saying different things. Even major news organizations in the region who took the story, they just copied and pasted a lot of things without fact checking them. So my job was not just fact checking or making sure of what exactly happened in that story, but also fact checking with major news organizations and people on the ground saying, by trying to locate the main resources on the ground. So it's a lot of countries to cover. It's Middle East and North Africa. There are 22 countries, each with its own package of issues and policies and style of governance. So it's not an easy thing to just keep track of every single country. What are they doing? What are they saying? What kind of events that happening? But it's also it's also rewarding to just keep an eye on the entire region and fact check everything that is happening. Misinformation and disinformation in that area is growing, and the different conflicting parties keep financing their own operation to spread whatever they want to spread. At the same time, as I said, while they hush journalists and activists and they limit internet access and social media. For example, in Iran, they keep introducing laws to limit press freedom and access to internet. And this is only one thing that we usually fact check in Iran. There are a lot of other set of issues that we fact check, like the nuclear program and the negotiations and the human rights in that country. So this is mostly what the things that the topics that I cover, and like a little bit of the challenges that I usually face.
Everything that you just presented and you said, it's extremely valuable and really, you know, a great way, a great opportunity for us to learn a little bit more about your work and the background work that has been happening behind detecting misinformation, disinformation. My first question before we open the stage also to our attendees to start asking their questions and participate in our discussion is, how does it make you feel, the fact that you are basically doing, to some extent, the work that journalists on the ground, particularly in countries with authoritarian regimes, they cannot do because they are not free to do this work that you do in terms of the fact checking? It's not easy, you described it, but particularly, you know, there are countries where journalists cannot, you know, even admit that something is wrong. And even more, news organizations, they don't do their fact checking before spreading a source of information that they were supposed to have checked before distributing to the public. How does this make you feel from the point of view of a journalist who is doing the work that is not an easy work to do it on the ground, in particularly in some countries? Where should we start? Should we start with Nisan? What's your view? How does this make you feel?
I think it's a big responsibility and a privilege to do that, to be protected, and at the same time to be a voice and to try to look and for the truth in all of this propaganda. I think it's for me, I see it as I help journalists on the ground to say what they couldn't say in their countries and their locations. Sometimes we do contact journalists, as William said, on, you know, Voice of America has a lot of language services, and we do contact journalists on the ground. So we can say what they cannot say. We can write what they cannot write. And at some way, somehow, we might also keep them protected by, you know, just being the voice or being the voice for whatever they want to say.
Fatima, what's your view? How does it make you feel after all the years also of your work? Just if you can unmute yourself.
I forgot that. As I said, I will work mostly on Russia, but other regions as well, Middle East, for instance. And in Russia, there is no fact checking practically. We sometimes, we try to do it weekly, translate our pieces into Russian. Of course, those that are related to the Russian context, and we post them on this very popular Echo Moskvy website. It's one of the biggest radio stations in Russia. They also have their own website. So they allowed us to post our fact checks. And we see that there is a huge interest in our context. And the viewership of our posts shows us that people really need to hear something different. When you hear 24/7 only propaganda, only what the Russian government wants you to hear from your TVs, if you're getting arrested for a Facebook post, of course, fact-checking Putin, saying that the things he just, declared over the national TV or in his address to the parliament, how many lies there are, point by point, dissecting it. It actually very much impresses people in those countries that are ruled by authoritarian regimes. And of course, to remain in power, those countries really, really need to suppress free voices, and there's no transparency. So I think our work really matters, especially because we have to deal with, as Nisan said, authoritarian and in some places even dictatorial regimes.
Yeah. William, what is your view? What do you think that the greatest degree of misinformation, disinformation is coming from which countries? Is there any metrics? What regions? Do we have any metrics for that?
I mean, there are definitely metrics for measuring it. To my mind, I would say that it feels emotionally, I'd feel like it's Russia, but I couldn't verify that because I do know that, for example, there's recent studies between AP and Oxford where they'd found out that the degree to which China has been using bots and sock puppets to amplify their messages, it's via what has been called their wolf warrior diplomacy, which is something that they started in 2017 as kind of a way of, they ended up using their embassy staff as a means to spread, well, sometimes disinformation and sometimes just the government message. But then attached to that have been massive networks of bots and trolls. So in pure numbers, it would be a toss-up between Russia and China. Emotionally, once again, it feels like Russia. I think also because Russia has developed a much stronger foothold in the West, but I would be remiss to state that categorically because I do think that there might be a possibility that it could be China, but I'd really have to look at the data on that.
Yeah. Let me give the first question to Kashpur Azdan, who I must say has been a scholarship awardee of the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents. Kashpur, here you are.
Hi everybody, it's good to hear from you. And this, this panel comes out at at a time when we are actually facing a lot of misinformation and disinformation from Russia and Ukraine coming in. My question is, actually, I was based in Beijing for 3 years, and I happen to know how that propaganda machinery really works. And I just have to make one observation that you were saying that China's propaganda is very clunky. It's actually very clunky because most of their propaganda is directed at local people. It's actually not for international audience. What they do is actually produced for their local people, and that's why it's like that. Okay, now my question is actually about a lot of videos we see coming up on social media, even the Ukraine video that that came up, and it turned out it was an old video. So as a journalist who's freelancing, who doesn't have access to the technology to actually verify these videos, what would be the toolkit? Actually, what would be the first few steps you would suggest that one should go through while dealing with such videos that just surface out of nowhere on social media?
Who wants to take the stage to answer the question? William?
No, I was trying to, maybe I think Fatima is a little bit more technically adept. What do you think, Fatima?
So the question is about the tools you can use to verify and check the authenticity of the videos, right? Or other media material. There was also on Q&A the similar question: what type of OSINT tools you can use? First of all, let me start sharing my screen. Okay, where did it go? Oh my God. Okay, let me start sharing my screen. So there are actually tools that help you to verify information and check whether it's true or not. And one of the good tools is, for instance, if you work in the one of the most disinformation flooded area, the COVID-19, is this tool, COVID Misinfo dashboard. It has different opportunities for you to check the claim types. It gives you the what you can find on Twitter about false claims. There is a full database of this Twitter misinformation, and there is dashboard. For instance, it shows you the amount of disinformation. You can also see what other fact checkers are doing by region, by number, by languages. It's produced by the Duke Club, and it's really, really useful if you want to see what others are doing. And sometimes it's actually really good to check with this source to make sure that you get your own fact check exactly fully covered on all bases. So those are two good things that you can actually use to if you work on COVID, as they say it, infodemic. For the OSINT stuff and for the videos, there are tools that, there is a lot of OSINT right now, and some of them are kind of, complicated and confusing, but there are, other sources, for instance, Acid Curious. This one, OSINT Curious, can give you a kind of simplified guidance, actually a tutorial where to look, how to do stuff. And as you see, it's categorized how to do search on Facebook. It has a lot of videos and podcasts, live stream tips. So this is a good source. OSIT Start Me is another one, which is really good too, because it has categories and it helps you to identify and check, for instance, deepfakes, videos that are actually nearly undistinguishable from the original videos. They're so well done thanks to the current technology. So you have to really, really dig in to find out what's going on with this video, what's been done to make it look so authentic. So I would recommend these two because they have, a whole bunch of lists. Each of these lists, links, they also lead to different sources. So it's really good. Try them if you want to do OSINT. I think this would help you. Just start.
Great. Let's go to Marlo, who is going to be here. Marlo, you can introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Marlo. I'm a graduating senior here at the University of Florida, studying journalism and wildlife ecology. So I'm specializing in environmental journalism and hoping to do that abroad. And should I go ahead and ask some questions?
Yes,
okay.
Of course.
So I have a couple, if that's okay.
Yeah.
But one of them is, I'm curious to know if any of you think there are, or what what you guys think about any areas of the world, so either countries or regions that are that you would say are in desperate need of this type of fact checking, but aren't receiving the attention that they deserve. So obviously Russia is a hotspot, but maybe some other countries that we don't hear about as much that maybe are in really bad need of the kind of work that you all are doing.
Yeah, actually, we have done some fact-checking and investigations on environmental issues, and as you said, it was mainly in Russia. We didn't do environmental fact-checking in other countries. But the challenges of doing that actually is, as I mentioned, transparency, lack of sources, not too many sources in Russia available to verify some information. So in this case, you do practically a swap of social media. You look for specific information for keywords. Not only Twitter or Facebook, but you go to the Russian social media, and sometimes you actually find people who work at those places or have witnessed some environmental crimes, and you can actually get information from the ground when you do your due work research. So my rule number one is always try to dig deeper and go to the original information. That's the place to start. Every time I try to rely on what others reported on anything, I regret, because when you go to the original, even when you pick a quote, a claim to fact check from somebody who saw it somewhere else and just repeated that, you try to go to the original and you find out the original quote is kind of different. So, and that happens all the time. Also in regards to the environmental issues, there was what I remember the last time I did was the fate of orcas, kept in captivity in horrible conditions. Most of them died in Russia. So I had to go actually find, it was in Far East, find people through the social media, Russian social media platform Vkontakte, who actually went there and photographed those orcas to verify the information about them. So it's a lot of work. You have to be dedicated to this, to be able to find an information. If it was in the United States, for instance, there are a lot of tools available for journalists. There are laws that the governments need to uphold to. There is transparency. You can file and get information that otherwise is not public. It's not like that in Russia or any other country we work with. So we have to go through other routes to find out what's going on, really. I hope I answered your question.
I was just going to chime in really quickly as to the other part of your question. Oh, I'm sorry, Nisan, I think you're going to cover it, the region.
No, I just have a suggestion that you were asking about the region, and it's interesting for me that the next United Nations Climate Change Conference will be held they will hold it in Egypt this year. So this is something like for me, I rarely read anything or hear anything about what Egypt, for example, is doing to protect the oceans, to protect the wildlife and the environment there, the ecosystem, if there are any initiatives. So this is This is what I wanted to say. Go ahead, William, sorry.
Well, no, the only reason I was going to hand the mic over to you on that was because organizationally, as to your question, geographically, where it's most difficult to verify, at least for us, I can definitely say Africa. We even had a meeting with the service chief in Africa. And of course, that one of the central challenges that came up to even possibly giving us resources to start covering that area more broadly, what she asked was that, well, what language? Because, for example, even if they could give us 1 or 2 people, what percentage of the languages are we even covering? Africa is so culturally and linguistically diverse. And then there are also a lot of other technological issues involved with being able to access information. From my perspective, and once again, I know very little about Africa compared to other regions of the world, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but I would feel that it would probably be Africa for the second part of your question, at least from my experience.
Yeah, thank you all for your input on that. I'm actually glad to hear you say that, William, because that's kind of what I was getting at or thinking in my head. Sub-Saharan Africa is my region of greatest interest, so that kind of confirms what I was thinking. And then if we have time, I'll ask my other.
Yes, please.
Okay. So one of the other things that this made me think of this whole conversation is, we've spoken with a lot of other foreign correspondents in this class who talk about, the unsaid rule about, staying in one place for too long, and then you start to develop your own opinions about maybe the politics in that area. And so I wanted to ask, on that note, have there been instances where, especially, so many of these topics that you all cover are deeply ingrained in human rights issues, and I love the advice, not the advice, but the just fact that, journalists are humans first, always. And so it's difficult, of course, to separate emotion from some of this reporting. But I mean, have there been times where it's been a challenge to separate yourself emotionally from something that you're reporting on, where your work requires you to take a step back sometimes, just for the clarity of your reporting? And let me know if that question didn't make sense.
Who wants to start first? Fatima?
Well, every day, honestly. It was much more difficult when I was working back, on the ground in Russia, covering the war, seeing all the horrible things that were, unfolding right in front of my eyes. And I remember when I was getting one of my awards, the jury told me that I was part of the story always. I don't believe that journalists who report from the ground, especially from war, need to separate themselves from their story. It's impossible, and I do see that people, a lot of journalists say that we have to do this, we have to be impartial. It's impossible. For a war journalist, it's impossible. But when right now we're sitting behind the desks, and even now it is impossible, to be not emotional when we see what Putin is saying and doing in Ukraine. So you have to hold yourself back all the time to make sure that every single word you are writing in your verification piece is actually a fact, not an emotion, not anything that could be questioned. Because, you are fact checkers and you can't make mistakes. You have to be absolutely sure that nothing interferes with the facts when you do a verification of something. I hope this helps.
Nisan, William, would you like to add something on that?
I would say that I also agree with Fatima. I was in Russia and Ukraine when everything started initially in 2013, 14. And I was much more emotionally invested in everything that was happening for a lot of reasons. And that made it more difficult. And I've been out of the region now for a few years. And I have to say, for me, it's definitely made this job easier, because the blood boils a bit less when you come across certain things that are infuriating, because you know the very real world consequences, because it's not just a news story on your mobile phone, but there are human beings that are connected to these places and these events. You know, for example, that a lot of people can speak about, it makes a difference when a city that might be bombed or invaded is filled with people that you love, versus having a general love for humanity that we all have as people, and being against that, because so that I could say that being away from it a little bit makes this particular job easier, but it's very different because I've never been a war correspondent like Fatima was. So I can't speak to that experience, but she can speak to it in more depths than we have time for. But so, yeah, but I would say definitely for this particular job, being a bit removed for it is very helpful, because fact checking, being dispassionate definitely helps a lot.
Great. Nisan, you would like to say something?
No, like I think Fatima and William covered it. So yeah.
Great. Let's go to Alex Raufoglu, who is a foreign correspondent and wants to participate. Alex, we can hear you.
Hey, thank you so very much for this very compelling discussion. I'm so sorry I can't turn on my camera now because I just arrived at the DOS for an interview. There's so many things going on in town these days. You know, things are moving at ominous speed over Ukraine. First of all, I'm so glad to see Fatima joining us tonight. You know, her case was my capstone project back at grad school several years ago. And as someone who has been observing her career over the years, it's amazing, you know, to see how she has trained her eyes and ears against Putin's disinformation campaign. So by saying that, Fatima, as you know from your personal experience, the Russians have used a lot of areas in the Soviet Union, in the Eastern European countries, including Northern Russia, where you are from originally, and you know, even its own people, to test out some of those techniques, you know, coming from the Soviet, maybe KGB, you know, disinformation tools, toolkits, spreading conspiracy theories and fake news. And some of those countries, as you know, in Eastern Europe particularly, have tried to protect themselves against this, you know, perhaps even happening in the future. What are some of those techniques that they have used that you think we could maybe learn from? You know, so all of the things that Eastern European countries are doing right now to combat, you know, Russian disinformation, what's one of the most effective ones you think that they have tried? And to the general panel, I get the sentiment about, you know, the importance of facts against disinformation. Coming from journalism, I'm so happy to see the State Department putting out there, you know, the report last month on Russian disinformation tools, particularly, you know, outlining some of those RT and Sputnik's, tools that they have been using. But I can't help but ask to the general panel, how effective are facts against the conspiracy theory, in particular in the countries like Russia? You know, because a lot of people who believe conspiracy theories are kind of immune to facts, right? So, so once they believe, you know, in a conspiracy theory, it's hard to talk them out of it. Am I right, or am I making too, you know, am I too naive to believe that this won't work at this time? Again, thank you so much. This is very compelling discussion.
Who wants to take the lead to answer Alex's question?
I think he asked me, so I'll start, maybe William continue. Yes, the question makes sense, Alex, you're not wrong. But remember that we are not, our general audience, the people we are writing for are not conspiracy theorists. And you're right, it's practically impossible to, make a conspiracy theorist change his or her mind. So our audience is what we think, what we want to believe, is people who want to know the truth, as opposed, and learn the actual facts, as opposed to disinformation, falsehoods, and propaganda. our situation as Polygraph is a little bit different, maybe a lot different from regular fact checkers, for instance, in the United States, because what we deal with is not just an honest error, a mistake. Everybody can make a mistake, but what we deal with is an intentional lie. In most cases, they know that what they're saying is not true, but they're still saying it because it serves them. What are their goals? Of course, to create chaos, to at some point to make people believe that there is no truth. Truth simply doesn't exist because everybody lies. That's, in my opinion, the general point of Russian disinformation. And when they say that Russia weaponized disinformation, it's true, because a lot of, there is a specific disinformation and troll agencies within the Russian SVR, which is the Служба внешней разведки, the Foreign Intelligence Service. There are units within the Ministry of Defense, and they're very effective, including cyber attacks and hacking and all not even spying, but specifically, stealing information to use it against their adversaries publicly, leaking that information. So Russia is very advanced in its disinformation campaigns and techniques and strategies. And a lot of that, as you said, Alex, comes from the KGB, the Russian Communist Security Service. And what the Eastern European countries are doing is actually very impressive. In some places and in others, it's the opposite. We see that, for instance, there are tons of websites posing as locals in the Balkans. They are, run in local languages, in Bulgarian, in Romanian, in Slovak, in Czech, in other languages. But if you go and do some OSINT, IP addresses and domains and other stuff, you can some of them are really well hidden, but you can actually find out that most of those websites are run from St. Petersburg or Russia. There is a Center for Intelligence. What was the name of it? Not intelligence, but excellence. NATO Center for Excellence. They're doing a great job in unmasking Russian disinformation and actually finding those sources that Russia uses as a platform for spreading disinformation on the local levels. Ukraine is doing a good job too. They have a Stop Fake, they have other fact checking and disinformation fighting sources. So in terms of who does the best job in fighting Russian disinformation, I would say that it's the Baltic countries and Ukraine among all other places. In the Balkans, we have a few in Albania and in Slovakia, there are a few fact-checking sources, but all of them are not as effective, for instance, as Stop Fake in Ukraine is. Alex, did I answer your question?
Impressive. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
let's go to Luke Sandlin. Luke, here you are.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. My name is Luke. As the professor just noted, I live and work in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. House of Representatives for Congressman Adam Kinzinger. And on the side, I am a national grassroots director and a part of his PAC. So we deal with journalists every day, and obviously misinformation is a big part of our job. So this is really fascinating to me. I was curious, after going through your website, which is super user-friendly, by the way, I really liked looking through it. How do you decide what to post and what not to post? Like, I guess, what's your metric for saying, okay, this is a really important piece of disinformation that we need to put out there and inform people is a lie, as opposed to something smaller where you're like, okay, we don't have time for this. Let's focus on the bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, I just went really quickly. There are different ways, like from TweetDeck to Hootsuite, where you can kind of measure just how far any different thing is spread. So we kind of try to keep a balance between how far is something spread and are you going to do more damage or less damage by even deciding to cover it? And so I would say that sometimes if you would say that a specific source of news is so ridiculous that it's not even worth countering, you still have to look at the idea of, well, how far and wide has it already spread across different vectors of social media? Because at some point, if the cat's already out of the bag, if otherwise you would think that it's just not worthwhile, then you wouldn't do it. I mean, sometimes you can get a sense that something seems so ridiculous. I think one thing that I can remember is that the claim that luciferase was like a satanic plot that was put in the COVID vaccine that had spread. Well, that was something where, generally speaking, if that had only been shared, for example, on InfoWars, I think that I would have skirted that topic. But that ended up being something that really spread quite wide. And so then I felt like, well, the problem is this has already been viewed by so many people that then there is somewhat of an obligation to counter it. But I would say that would be generally, you do hope that you're countering things from more verifiable information because, more verifiable sources, because you don't want to amplify things that are a bit out there, but it really just depends on how far they've already spread out to the culture.
Any other question, Luke?
Yes. This is a really broad question, so feel free, anybody can take this one, but I'm just curious. I know you mentioned that you guys roughly started around 2016. That was obviously a big presidential election, a lot of talk about misinformation. Have you seen a steady rise of misinformation throughout mainstream media in this country and other countries, or has it stayed stagnant? It's, the misinformation is misinformation. It's always going to be that way.
I'll jump in really quickly and give someone else a chance. You want to go, Fatima?
Since I've been with Polygraph, since 2016, I would say that depends. If you're talking about Russia, the amount of disinformation and misinformation, I wouldn't say that it increased or decreased. It's always been a tsunami. Our challenge, one of our challenges is actually related to your previous question. How is it, to choose which of these statements to go? So one of the principles is when we have, for instance, Russian foreign minister and Russian president saying something similar, maybe not, specifically the same thing, but similar thing. Of course, we go with Putin. He is higher ranking, and his word is, has more value to the Russian domestic and global audience than the words of his subordinate, which in this case is Lavrov. Russian disinformation did not ever go down or decrease. It just shifts a little bit in terms of its character, its targets, and it could be an immediate target right now or persistent target. Among the persistent targets, of course, are Ukraine. The United States is forever there. NATO is the target, and I would say that the United States is maybe even a bigger target when it comes to domestic audience, because in Russia, you can, if you watch that country long enough in terms of disinformation, you can see that there is a distinguished line between the disinformation that is created for the foreign audiences and disinformation and propaganda that is created to target the domestic audiences. We take both actually, but in terms of choosing which one is more important, of course, we always go for whatever is of the United States interests and concerns, because it's also important for other audiences globally. Did I answer your question?
You did, thank you. And at the risk of taking too much time, I just had one more quick question. It's more of an opinion, but obviously right now your site is, it's mainly focused on Russian disinformation. That's probably just because they're putting out more at the moment with the pending invasion of Ukraine. But I'm curious from your standpoint, how does it feel to see places like RT Today, Russian propaganda kind of being parroted on places like, and they're an easy target, but like Fox News, for example? Does that worry you at all to kind of see that misinformation spreading to American media and, places like Tucker Carlson with 4 million viewers a night? How does that, kind of make you feel?
William, do you want to answer that?
Well, that's been kind of an interesting feedback loop, because if you went to the RT website right now, it basically looks like a rehashed version of Breitbart. They've waded really into the cultural war issues, and every second word on their homepage is woke or trans. So it's kind of an interesting way that those two things have circulated. As to your first question, I can say from personal experience, I hate to say this, and I'm trying to think of the most sensitive way that I can do it. A lot of things that I experienced living in Russia in terms of how a certain lack of institutional belief coupled with a lack of belief in media led the population very susceptible to conspiratorial narratives. Things that I saw happening in Russia 10 years ago, I see happening in the United States now, and for many of the same reasons. Maybe, I know that's a little vague, it might or might not answer your question, but I would say that it's Peter Pomerantsev, who's a really good writer who writes a lot about disinformation. He has this concept that he's actually, I think he borrowed it from someone else whose name is slipping my mind, but it's called the Gullible Cynic. It's the person who is so cynical in their disbelief that in some ways you can actually almost make them believe anything. But I guess another thing that has happened though is that this has actually come hand in hand with technological developments, and for example, what Facebook and other social media platforms have done, which unfortunately have managed to monetize spreading information that's insightful. And I think that to that degree, there are also some members of the US media who also monetize information that's insightful. So.
Yeah, thank you for your input. I appreciate y'all's time.
Great. Let's go to Bruce Swell. We don't hear you, Bruce.
Am I good now?
And anyone else who wants to join, please raise your hands, because we really need to have an indication that you want to join the discussion.
Am I all good now?
Yes, of course.
Good. So my name is Bryce. I'm a student at the University of Florida. I'm studying journalism, as many of the people attending this webinar are. And when I get out of college, probably not within like the next couple of years, but hopefully later down the line, I hope to be a war correspondent. So my question is kind of general and a bit broad, and it's concerning how to report about foreign policy to your audience and how to give context about it. Because what I'm seeing a lot now in terms of American media outlets reporting on the current situation with Russia and Ukraine is that they're having a difficult time grasping how Russia is making these decisions and how that's enmeshed with their current foreign policy. And that lack of understanding is kind of it leads me, at least, and I can only imagine other people watching these media outlets, to getting confused about why Russia is making these decisions as opposed to what their current foreign policy stances are on the world stage. So my question is, what are some just tips and advice on reporting about foreign policy and how that interacts with historical context without getting too bogged down in the minutia or the nuance of a country's broad foreign policy, or why they're doing certain things?
Fatima.
Maybe Nisan wanna talk because she's been silent for a long time.
Nisan.
I don't know. I think Fatima is the best person to answer this question, actually.
Fatima, you are the veteran here.
Oh yeah, thank you, veteran. Well, reporting on foreign policy sounds a little bit too big. Every time you focus on something specific, just try to, keep in mind that you're not, it depends what sort of journalism you want to do. You want to do analysis or a report. Reporting is different, of course. So I've done mostly reporting. I never did like big analysis on foreign policies. So I don't think my advice would be really good. But I mean, to report on foreign countries, the best start would be, if you know what country you want to report from, start from learning their language and culture. Go there and live not as a journalist, but just, as a curious person who wants to learn something before starting reporting from there. I've seen a lot of, little mistakes that undermine the quality of the reporting, that probably, if you live in the United States and you read New York Times, Washington Post, AP, Reuters, you've never noticed those little things. But if you are, for instance, as Nisan, coming from the Middle East, and there is a report on Turkey in which you see, many little things that are not accurate, a little bit not accurate, you start, questioning the quality of that reporting, unfortunately. So the best thing to start doing becoming a foreign correspondent, reporting on foreign policy, is to learn the country you wanted to report on. That's my best advice.
Bryce, do you have any other question you would like to follow up very quickly before we go to the other?
That was the only question I had for tonight.
Let's go to Grace. Grace, we don't hear you.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm a senior at the University of Florida as well, and I study political science and journalism, and I'd love to get into international reporting after graduation. And my question was, it was a follow-up question that was asked earlier, about how some of the propaganda is is aimed for local people versus international audiences. Like, which one would you think is more common, and like kind of in what regions?
Well, I mean, I guess when I would say that there's really not a lot of countries that are really focused on international messaging. There are some. I mean, for example, I can think of Saudi Arabia off the top of my head, and China and Russia, of course. But I could say that in the, I forgot her name, who mentioned earlier being in Beijing for 2 years, and mentioned that some of the information that seemed more crude was targeted at the domestic audience, which actually is very true for Russia as well, because whatever you see being spread by, because Russia has a very, very large foreign news apparatus, from their broadcaster Sputnik to RT, and they have a lot of other ones sometimes which they describe as being Russian foreign media outlets. But if you compare that to what is actually in, for example, a newspaper like Komsomolskaya Pravda, which is kind of a somewhat of a tabloid, but then if you have they have a TV channel called REN TV, or even if you just look at the other state-run media, they don't pull any punches for their domestic audience in terms of how far down the rabbit hole they'll go. There, a lot of countries, that's a very complicated sociological reason why, but if you look at a lot of Russian domestic media, it would, even state-run media, it would be indistinguishable from something like InfoWars. I mean, they will use state government channels to spread conspiracy theories on that level. Once again, getting to the point where accusing, you would see a state media report accusing, for example, the former president of Georgia of being involved in organ trafficking. I mean, things that are absolutely out there. And what you can see is that there is a filtering layer when they try to message in languages outside of their own for international audiences, because they realize that, okay, we can't go quite that far. But I would have to say that there aren't so many countries in the world that have such a developed dual media apparatus of one that targets a domestic audience versus one that targets an international audience. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope so.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Would you like to ask any other question, Grace?
I did just have a clarifying question.
Yes.
William, you said earlier the 4 Ds of propaganda, it was like distract, distort. Could you just clarify that?
Distract, dismiss, distort, and dismay. Yeah. It's I think that was Ben Norton who came up with that. Was that correct, Fatima? From the Atlantic Council, was that Ben Norton who first came up with that, the 4 Ds, or?
I think it was Pomerantsev.
Oh, Pomerantsev probably also, yeah. But
Yeah.
yeah, so the idea of that, of course, is that it kind of gets back into the idea that had been mentioned earlier with bringing up that picture of all the competing theories for MH17, is that, for example, the distort is when someone makes a claim, for example, you shot down that airline, you will either try to distort the information that proves that you did it. You can dismay people by making them so afraid of your reaction for even accusing them of it that they want to back off before that they even try to go after you. Dismiss is just say, oh, that's just Western propaganda. They're always blaming us. They've always had it out for us. No one understands us. We're the ones who are really the victims. We're being victimized by you accusing us of shooting down that plane. So, yeah, so that but I mean, what it really is that it's basically lots of different methods to simply get people from looking at the actual facts of what happened, because you never actually want to, that's one of the things that's become a bit more difficult about this era, is that there are not a commonly agreed on set of facts. And sometimes they don't want you to have a commonly agreed on set of facts. Sometimes the facts will indict them. So the whole idea of that strategy is simply to talk about everything but what you're actually talking about through any means necessary. Or to do the big one that has actually gained, a lot of people now know about whataboutism, which is every time that you bring up a claim, well, what about this? What about that? What about that? But once again, whataboutism, for example, if someone was going to say, and rightfully so, if they said Russia's about to invade Ukraine, and they said, well, what about the United States invading Iraq? Well, you have to actually think of, well, what's the end goal of bringing up Iraq? Are you saying, okay, then Russia should invade Ukraine? See, the problem with even that strategy is that it actually ends up making the world a worse place. It's much better to say, you know what, the United States should not have invaded Iraq and Russia should not invade Ukraine, versus trying to distract away from it, because you can always come up with an analogy, a historical analogy, to bring the focus off. And maybe that historical analogy needs to be addressed, but you always have to ask yourself, what is the end goal of bringing up that analogy? Is it to stop something bad from happening again? Or is it distract you from saying, oh, you're right, everyone does bad things. We all do bad things. So why should we even stop from doing bad things? Well, that doesn't seem like a very good direction to go. So there.
Thank you so much.
Taz, you're muted.
Sorry, guys. That was my turn to be muted. Saida, let's go to Saida, who is a foreign correspondent from India. Saida, do you hear us? Do you want to ask your question directly? Saida, oh yeah, here it is. We cannot hear you, but we are happy to, we cannot hear you. If you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you, everyone. It has been very interesting. I just have a question to any one of you. Suppose you do your, fact finding in some country, and does the foreign policy of the country you are in, right now you're in the United States, suppose the foreign policies of the country you are in any way influence your decision to make your findings public, because you don't want to create problem between two countries or something, Has it happened?
Who wants to? Fatima, probably.
I don't know how much problem we can create between, for instance, United States and Russia or United States and China. We had at least one situation when we were not sure whether we should make the information we received public. It was back during the peak of the Syrian war, and the tapes we received from a source actually were a real recording of a conversation between a Wagner. I'm not sure everybody knows what Wagner is. It's a Russian military, private military company, actually not so private, because there is a suspicion and there is a lot of reliable information that it works under the umbrella of the Russian Defense Ministry. So the tapes, the recordings we received were about the how to say, fighting between the American forces and the Russian Wagner in Syria. So we were not sure this was not a provocation or something, but we actually checked all the information from possible Syrian sources from everywhere. And when we received some information about that the battle actually took place, but nobody knew the sources, we were able to confirm the authenticity of the tape we received. And after that, we decided to go on and publish it, the fact check on that. So after we published that, the NBC picked it up. We practically broke the story, and about 2 weeks after we published the story, the Pentagon confirmed it. So I'm not sure if we were creating problems or just revealing the information. As a journalist, I think everybody agrees to that. Our main purpose is to deliver information to the people, and that information, before we do, as Nisan said, first of all, we are responsible to our audiences for delivering verified information. So we hesitated, and that hesitation was because we needed to verify whatever we put out is actually a real information, not a fake. So that was the reason of our hesitation, not the that we're afraid to create some kind of problem in relationships with some between two countries or whatever. So I think the main rule is to go with the journalistic codes, and that's always a golden rule too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Fatima.
Let's go to Michelle Holder.
Hey guys, okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Michelle. I am a third-year journalism student here at the University of Florida. And my question for you guys is kind of where you see the investigative fact-checking journalism industry going into the future, and kind of any advice for us who are entering the industry post-university.
Me again. So investigative journalism, wow, it's a great field. Advice number one, learn Python or other coding languages. It's very important. Try to learn something every day from the OSINT sources. Very little thing maybe, but every day something in the OSINT field. See what others are doing. Go with digital stuff. It's very important because, on one hand, the technology is giving us a lot of advantages as journalists. On the other hand, it also adds as much challenges in terms of verification, in terms of, distinguishing between the false and the real. So yeah, if you can become, maybe what they call an ethical hacker, if you wanted to be a future investigative journalist, that's the best way to go. Look at the Bellingcat. I mean, the Russians were describing Elliot Huggins as a guy who was sitting on his couch and playing video games. Look at where he is now, and what Bellingcat has done so far. Actually, Russia banned it, although it doesn't have any offices in Russia. They're so afraid of the information coming out of Bellingcat. They also banned a Voice of America, so we can be proud of that too.
Michelle, any follow-up question or something that William or Nisan would like to add?
No, I would just add on to what Fatima said. I would say in this day and age, digital investigations and OSINT skills are going to be, that is where it's going, definitely. I mean, versus more traditional forms of journalism, I'd say that especially someone your age, yep, that's exactly where you have to jump into, entering the job field.
Michelle, do you have anything else that you would like to throw in a question on the table?
That was great.
Alexandra, let's come to you.
Hi, I'm Alexandra. I'm studying sports and media journalism, and I'm going into technical writing when I graduate. I was wondering if you've ever run into trouble or been called out or put in a dangerous situation due to the fact checking that you've done over the years.
I mean, we've definitely been called out because there are people who are watching what we're doing and they want to catch us out on anything that they can. I think one of the funniest things that you find though is that people who have absolutely no commitment whatsoever to ever telling the truth will actually go over every single word that you say with a fine-tooth comb to catch any mistake that you have. But that comes with the territory. I mean, because if you're looking to expose powerful people, then they're not going to like what you have to say. But I mean, working out of Washington, D.C., I can't say that we've ever faced any physical threats or anything like that. So not from this particular job, no, on that end.
I can just add that I'm not sure if anybody remembers that, but before this Novichok, the Russian nerve agent poisoning, there was a time when Russia also used radioactive polonium to poison a former agent in London, also in the UK. So when I was debunking the Russian denials and misinformation about the Novichok poisoning in Salisbury, I also went back and reported about the previous poisoning with polonium. So after that, I started receiving on Twitter. Somebody started, there were several accounts. I think they were bots, or not bots, but anonymous accounts that were, they would create special cards, like meme cards, or how do you call them? So in those, Putin holding a rock, radioactive rock from a polygon in Kazakhstan, where they used to launch the rockets in the past from the Soviet Union, and it would say like Putin watching on that rock and like thinking there was a sign, shall I give this rock to Fatima as a gift or not? And there were like a lot of stuff like that going on my Twitter. Apparently, actually, the Russia Today chief editor, Margarita Simonyan, who I know from back, reporting from the Caucasus, she actually started attacking me on Facebook, so I had to ban her. So things are happening. I mean, not recently, but like a few years ago, yes, it was happening.
No, I actually just thought of another point to that. One of a coworker, and this coworker is not alone in this situation. And so I'm speaking from a certain degree of privilege, being an American citizen who is living here. But my coworker who does help me with some of the work that I do, and other people in their situation, can't write with bylines because their family members have already been visited by state security agencies just for the very fact that they happen to be working in Washington, D.C. in the United States without even knowing specifically what they're doing. So I should mention that once again, I'm lucky that I don't have to face that kind of thing, because I should qualify by saying that coworkers, especially those who have family in some of these countries, cannot be so open, cannot, for example, even attend this session because their face cannot be publicized or recorded and broadcast. So it really depends on who you are. If you're me, a lucky American guy, yeah, no problem. But that's not necessarily true for some other people who are absolutely indispensable to what we do at the Voice of America. So
Thank you for sharing this. Alexandra, do you have any other follow-up question? And guys, promise we are going to conclude this program. You see that we have a lot of questions, and this is really interesting, and we really appreciate all of your time. Alexandra, do you have a very follow-up question?
No, I don't. Thank you for your answers.
Alenis, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So my question is just kind of what was that shift like, going from being a journalist like on the ground, just reporting on news versus now being like a fact-checking journalist and having to monitor other news in these countries. I'm kind of curious about that shift and like what the differences are like and things like that.
I take the fifth.
Nisan, do you want to talk about it?
Well, I did talk about it in the introduction a little bit, but it was interesting for me to make the change from being a reporter working with the Extremism Watch Desk and also being a reporter in the Middle East, coming here and then moving to Polygraph. It's kind of different kind of process, different kind of wiring, a way of thinking about things. As a reporter, I had more, I did more of an analysis job. I did more of a talking with people on the ground, which we still do, but it's more about facts, more facts and more information. I think it's a transition between a wider perspective to a more nuanced and defined point of view that you need to be on point to produce a reliable fact check than just writing a story. Of course, it's for me, I like doing both. I also refer to myself as a storyteller, which is something that I like to do. But working with Polygraph, I did learn a lot of things about how to make sure that I get the facts right in order to tell a sound story to my audience. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that answered it perfectly. Thank you.
I just want to ask,
Fatima, please.
I'm gonna be honest. That transition was absolutely horrible and terrifying for me. I didn't know if I was gonna survive as a journalist behind the desk after all my years of on-the-ground reporting. I didn't know what to do, how to do stuff. It was just absolutely horrifying. And I'm not sure I'm done with the transition, and still, after probably 15 years of reporting, I still miss my on the ground, because when you report from the ground, you see things, you talk with the people, you are part of what's going on, and you know for sure this is exactly what happened. And I was like, how am I gonna know what is true, what is not true, just by talking to other people or checking other sources? So it was very difficult. And another part, and this is kind of a little personal, but also professional, as a journalist, I think some of you said that you want to be war correspondents. You have to know that you're gonna face, if you go to war, you're gonna face losses. And there is this thing that's called a guilt of survivor. I feel that every day, especially when I get news of my friends being killed, and I still do. A very good friend was killed in Africa, a Russian journalist. We covered a war together. We walked miles together, and he used to say that on 2 occasions, for sure, I saved his life. And now he was gone, and all I could do is just watch, photographs of his body and try to understand, whether what the Russians were saying, that he was just a victim of a criminal incident or was targeted and killed by the Wagner in there, and trying to separate my feelings from the work I was doing. That was one of the hardest things to do. So yeah, journalism is not the easiest profession. That's for sure.
Thank you very much. And before we conclude, last call from a question from Bryce Brown.
Hello, my name is Bryce. I'm a second-year student at the University of Florida. I'm studying journalism, and I'm currently in Gainesville, but I'm originally from Tampa, Florida. This is kind of a follow-up question, but I was kind of curious if you could touch again on like why you made that transition from being a reporter to solely doing fact-checking, if safety might have been like a factor, a part of that, and kind of how you got situated in that field.
That's a very long story. I would say the long and the short was that I had reached a point in my life where, that's a difficult one to say. I was ready to go back to America after many, many years of not living in America and having a certain degree of tension built up in me over certain experiences that I had being overseas for prolonged periods of time. And so that's probably, that was probably part and parcel of a certain life transition at that point, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I won't transition back in the future because the story is still going. So that I would have to be real personal to get into all of the details, but that's about as much as I could give on that.
Fatima, Nisan?
I think for me, it's I don't know, life took me that way. Not that I didn't choose, but I did choose that. But I came to this country in 2016, and I started working with Voice of America with the Extremism Watch Desk first, and then moved. So basically, I moved in the same organization. I found that I do want to expand my skills. It's for me, it's something to practice. Different kinds of journalism would make you a better journalist and writer. Moving from one type of writing and how you do things to another. So I think this is what basically make me transition, is that my desire to improve myself and to harness more skills to better my job, basically.
And we will conclude the conversation with you, Fatima.
Answering question or just
answer the question and have the closing remarks on behalf of the teams.
The transition question is kind of tricky to me because first of all, transitioning from field to the desk, that wasn't kind of a choice between what do you want to do. It was between, do you want to live or die? Because in my case, I had to emigrate from Russia. I was actually evacuated, and the safety question wasn't about me or any longer. It was about my kids. So that was the first transition. The second transition, why from actual reporting, in this case, Extremism Watch Desk, to fact-checking? Well, I was devastated, to be honest, because every day my day would start even at nights. I had a whole list of websites and social media accounts run by jihadists. At that time, ISIS was very active and doing horrible things. And every day I would watch tons of video, like hours of videos they posted, trying to identify whether these people were, from the areas that I cover, North Caucasus and Russia in general. So I was devastated because I've seen a lot of horrible videos, and I wanted just to get out of it. So that was the reason to go into fact check. And that said, I wanted to tell you guys, I was lucky to get into fact checking because now it feels like a mission. We do an important job, maybe not that popular as other fact checkers, but we, you can go to our website and you can find information you're looking for. I work with amazing people. Two of them you saw right now. I learn every day something new, and VOA is a great place to work. And to all of you who spent this time with us, thank you so much. I wish you great journalism in your future, and I wish you to love your profession. And Thanos, thank you so much for doing
Of course,
that.
thank you, a big thank you for taking the time, because it's been almost 2 hours, and we're really grateful that you dedicated these 2 hours to us, and it was really valuable. And we will also follow up with the takeaways of our discussion, and hopefully we will have you soon as our guests in one of our future programs. Thank you for all of you, for everything you are doing.
Thank you.
Donis.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Yeah, have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night.
Bye.